Viking warrior kneels before a wooden idol of Thor, his hammer pendant gleaming in the firelight, praying for strength in tomorrow's battle. Just across the sea, a Saxon warrior kneels before a cross, clutching rosary beads, whispering the exact same prayer to his god. Both men believe they're worlds apart, yet they're performing nearly identical rituals, seeking the same divine protection, bound by the same human fears and hopes. This is the untold story of how Viking paganism and Christianity weren't the polar opposites history wants you to believe they were. When we think of Vikings, we imagine fierce raiders destroying monasteries, burning churches, stealing golden crosses. We see them as the ultimate enemies of Christianity, savage pagans who worshipped strange gods and performed blood sacrifices. But here's what the history books rarely tell you. When Vikings and Christians actually sat down to talk, they discovered something that shocked them both. Their religions had been telling remarkably similar stories all along. Consider the world tree. In Viking mythology, Yggdrasil stands at the center of existence, a massive ash tree whose roots and branches connect 9 different worlds. Its 3 roots reach into wells of wisdom, fate, and the primordial waters of creation. Now walk into any medieval church and look up at the cross. Medieval Christians didn't just see 2 pieces of wood. They saw the tree of life, connecting heaven and earth, its arms stretching out to embrace all of creation. Some Christian texts from this period actually called the cross the world tree. The Vikings saw a cosmic tree holding reality together. Christians saw a wooden cross doing the exact same thing. The parallels run deeper than symbols. Take the creation stories. The Norse told of Ginnungagap, the primordial void, a yawning emptiness that existed before anything else. From this nothingness, fire and ice collided to create the first being. Genesis speaks of the earth being without form and void, with darkness over the face of the deep, until God's word brought forth light and life. Both traditions understood that before our world existed, there was nothing but potential, waiting for divine action to spark existence. But perhaps the most fascinating overlap appears in their flood myths. Every Viking child knew the story of how Odin and his brothers killed the giant Ymir, whose blood flooded the world, drowning all the giants except Bergelmir and his wife, who escaped in a hollowed-out tree trunk. Sound familiar? It should. Noah's Ark, the great flood that cleansed the world of wickedness, leaving only one righteous family to repopulate the earth. These weren't just similar stories. They were the same archetypal narrative, told through different cultural lenses. The Vikings even had their own version of the end times that would make any medieval Christian nod in recognition. Ragnarok, they called it, the twilight of the gods. It would begin with a great winter lasting 3 years. Wars breaking out across the world, brother fighting brother, all moral bonds dissolving. The sun and moon would be devoured, stars would fall from the sky, and a great battle would consume gods and men alike. Medieval Christians reading Revelation would find this eerily familiar. The sun turning black, stars falling like figs from a tree, wars and rumors of wars, the final battle between good and evil. What's truly remarkable is what comes after these apocalypses. The Vikings believed that after Ragnarok, the world would rise again from the waters, green and beautiful. 2 humans would survive, hidden in the world tree, and they would repopulate this renewed earth. The gods who survived would meet again in the golden halls. Christians spoke of a new heaven and a new earth, where God would wipe away every tear, where death would be no more. Both traditions couldn't imagine existence simply ending. There had to be renewal, redemption, a second chance for creation. The moral teachings overlap in ways that would have made Viking jarls and Christian bishops equally uncomfortable. The Havamal, a collection of Viking wisdom attributed to Odin himself, advises, "Be not hostile to a guest, nor drive him from your door. Treat the poor and needy well." Christ said, "Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me." The Vikings valued courage, loyalty, and keeping one's word above all else. Christians preached faith, hope, and charity. Different words, perhaps. But when a Viking warrior showed loyalty unto death for his lord, and a Christian martyr died, rather than renounce his faith. Weren't they expressing the same human valor? Even their practices of sacrifice held mirror images. Vikings made offerings to their gods, sometimes including human sacrifice in extreme circumstances, believing that giving up something precious would earn divine favor. Christians had their own sacrifice at the center of their faith. God himself, in human form, offered as the ultimate sacrifice for humanity's salvation. The Vikings understood that metaphor immediately. They knew about gods who suffered for wisdom. Odin hung himself on Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, to gain knowledge of the runes. A god hanging on a tree, pierced, suffering to bring gifts to humanity? The parallel was impossible to ignore. This might explain why conversion happened more smoothly than we often imagine. When Christian missionaries arrived in Scandinavia, they didn't always destroy pagan temples. Sometimes they built churches in the same sacred groves, understanding that spiritual ground was spiritual ground, regardless of which god you prayed to there. Vikings didn't abandon their worldview entirely. They translated it. Thor's hammer became Christ's cross, both symbols worn for protection. The Valkyries who carried fallen warriors to Valhalla became angels carrying souls to heaven. The truth is, both religions were trying to answer the same fundamental questions that have plagued humanity since we first looked up at the stars. Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we live? Is there meaning in suffering? The Vikings found their answers in the courage of gods who knew they would die but fought anyway. Christians found theirs in a God who chose to die but rose again. Different stories, same profound human need for meaning in the face of mortality. Today, we live in a world that often seems just as divided by belief as medieval Europe was. We look at other faiths, other worldviews, and see only the differences, the threats, the incompatibilities. But perhaps if Vikings and Christians could have seen past their prejudices, they might have recognized the deeper truth their overlapping myths revealed. We are all trying to make sense of the same mysteries, telling ourselves stories about trees and floods and sacrifice because these metaphors speak to something universal in the human experience. The next time you see a Viking helmet in a museum or a medieval cross in a church, remember that the people who wore and worshipped these symbols weren't as different as they thought they were. They stood under the same sky, feared the same darkness, hoped for the same light. Their gods had different names but answered the same prayers. Their stories took different shapes but carried the same truths. In the end, whether you called it Yggdrasil or the true cross, everyone was just looking for something solid to hold on to in an uncertain world. A connection between earth and heaven. A promise that existence meant something more than suffering and death. Perhaps that's the most surprising overlap of all. Not in their gods or myths or rituals, but in their deeply human need to believe that despite all evidence to the contrary, the story doesn't end with darkness. Somehow, somewhere, the tree keeps growing, reaching forever upward toward the light.